749-7000, 1-800-THE-BIG-ONE. Mike Allen in for Bill Cunningham. Hey, did you see, it just came out a couple of hours ago, the memo, not the exact executive order, but the memo explaining, it came out from Department of Homeland Security, the new executive order that I think should come sometime this week with respect to the travel ban that Donald Trump tried to put into effect a couple of weeks ago. It is now in litigation, went from the federal district court in Seattle to the Ninth District Court of Appeals, and we want to talk to someone who knows about these issues. He's a go-to guy on constitutional issues, an appellate attorney, and that is Attorney Byron Henry. And Mr. Henry, welcome to 700 WLW.
Great to be with you, Mike.
Hey, tell us about what happened today, about the memoranda itself, and what you see coming down the pike when the executive order comes down, and mainly how it differs from the first executive order.
Well, there's a lot of similarities, but the main differences are that the Trump administration seemed to address the vague issue, the vagueness that was in the original executive order, and that vagueness was with respect to this travel ban. Does it apply to lawful permanent residents? That's an issue that was cleared up a few days after the first executive order was issued by White House counsel, Mr. McGahn. The second issue is, what about people that already have their visas and either are here currently in the United States or leave the United States temporarily and want to come back using their visa even though they've already been approved and are holding an actual approved visa from the federal government? This memorandum seems to say that the new executive order will exempt all of those who are lawful permanent residents, those who have visas and are traveling or are currently here or abroad, even if they haven't used their visa to come to the United States yet, meaning they have an approved visa, they'll be exempt from the executive order. And by doing so, it seems that President Trump's executive order will basically exempt the only persons that anyone has any legitimate argument has any rights, either statutory or constitutional, to the extent those exist for people with visas at all. The argument will basically be pulling out the rug out from under the left's argument that there are people out there with these constitutional or statutory rights. These are the groups that may have had them, and President Trump is basically going to exempt them from the new executive order.
Let me ask you this. In your opinion as a constitutional law specialist, do you think that this will pass constitutional muster? And I know, I'm a practicing attorney here in Cincinnati, don't do a lot of appellate work or constitutional work, but a lot of people are scratching their heads thinking, hey, wait a minute. It's pretty much the president's prerogative to regulate immigration, who comes into this country. People are wondering why it ended up before the Ninth Circuit the first time around. I know that's a long-winded question, but do you think that this is tailored narrowly enough to pass constitutional muster if it goes into a court like the district court in Seattle or ends up in a court of appeals circuit like the Ninth?
Well, ultimately, I believe the first executive order, with the clarification that it didn't apply to lawful permanent residents, would ultimately pass constitutional muster. Certainly, there are far fewer, if any, arguments that there are some constitutional rights being violated for those who aren't here in the United States, aren't citizens, don't have any visa issued to them at all, and they just would like at some point in the future to come to the United States. That would be a hard case to make. Now, there is one issue left, and that is this argument that by targeting these 7 countries that were designated by the George W. Bush administration and the Obama administration as countries with specific concerns with regard to terrorism, that by targeting these predominantly Muslim countries, this is a de facto or intentional discrimination against Muslims on the basis of their religion. That argument has not been disposed of by the Ninth Circuit. It wasn't addressed. There's some issues to be resolved there. So we could still have that lawsuit, that this is basically targeting Muslims solely for the purpose of targeting Muslims. The problem, of course, is if you don't have visas and you don't have any other statutory or constitutional rights, I'm not sure what kind of standing they would have to bring that suit. But that is an issue that I see being brought again, even against this new executive order when it comes down.
Yeah, not to get too lawyerly here, but you mentioned the standing issue. And a lot of people, lawyers and non-lawyers alike, are wondering, what does the state of Washington have with respect to standing to bring this suit And I know what their stated reasons were, and they were pretty specious, again, to use a lawyer term, I guess. Are you telling me that you think the standing issue will be an issue in this new executive order that's going to come down later this week?
Absolutely. I believe that the Ninth Circuit's standing analysis in their first opinion was extremely, let's just put it, kind of elastic.
Yeah.
It was very broad. It had very little support or very light support from any type of precedent, especially Supreme Court precedent. But that notwithstanding, it will be even more difficult to find standing when you are talking about those who have not even applied for or obtained a visa. So basically you're talking about random foreign persons with no connection to the United States that just want to come to the United States, either as a refugee to seek asylum or possibly to obtain a visa to come here and work or travel or be a student or maybe just vacation. Those people would have to have standing to invoke a federal court to protect their rights to come here under the Constitution or some statute, and I'm not aware of those rights exist. I know that courts are coming up with rights, new rights, on a weekly, monthly basis.
Right.
In some courts, but I'm not aware of any rights, and they haven't decided that those people have the rights to not only enter the courts, but enter the country, certainly.
Byron Henry, constitutional law specialist. Let me ask you this. I mean, these are memoranda that were released from DHS today. When do you think the actual executive order will come down, and why do you think the Trump administration did it this way this time? If I'm not mistaken, I think last time they just kind of sprang it on people. This time they're doing it with memoranda. Do you think the reason for that is to kind of give people that have to deal with it a heads up?
Yeah, it's probably more administrative than it is political, though it certainly doesn't hurt to get out in front of the story and let people know what you're going to do. I think administratively, you've got a lot of agents, Department of Homeland Security people, at a lot of checkpoints and ports overseas, letting people into the country and in this country at airports and ports and whatnot that need to be given a heads up because, as you know, the bureaucracy in the administrative state, even including law enforcement and border enforcement, is huge, and you have to get it all the way through all the channels to the people that are actually on site as to who can and can't come into the country. Now, here's the beauty of the new executive order when it comes out, is if you have a valid visa, you will be able to come into the United States. So the old problem was you had people with valid visas that the executive order was saying you are temporarily barred from coming into the United States for 90 days. Under the new executive order, you won't have that kind of confusion because if your visa has been issued and is valid, otherwise, despite some other national security concern, like you're on a terrorist watch list or something like that, but specifically if you're just a professor wanting to come back into the country from, let's say, Iraq or whatnot, or a student, you will be able to get back into the country with a valid visa, and that takes up 90% of the confusion that was caused with the first executive order. Well,
along those lines, and having said that, I guess we probably should expect some constitutional challenge to this. And here's a question that I think I know the answer to as an attorney, but I'm not sure. If that challenge comes, does that necessarily go to the Seattle District Court and then through there to the Ninth, or could it be challenged in another federal district court in another federal circuit court of appeals?
Well, certainly anyone that thinks they have standing and the right to bring the lawsuit can bring it in any federal district in the United States, and it would go up through that circuit's appellate courts. Mm-hmm. But if there's a new executive order that Washington had universities that specifically had students and professors affected that had visas to come to the country and actually teach and attend the university affected by the first executive order. So in order for those plaintiffs, Michigan, the state of Washington, and the state of Minnesota, to actually come to court, they would have to have standing again. They would have to be harmed by this order in some form or fashion and find a plaintiff that meets all the criteria that would give them standing. So who knows who will be affected by this order, and who knows who gets to the courthouse first. But to answer your question, it could be anywhere in the country.
Do you think in the first go-round there was a little bit of forum shopping, if you will, that attorneys like to engage in to get it before that federal district judge in Seattle? So therefore, it would go to the Ninth Circuit, the most liberal, the most overturned federal district circuit appellate district in the country.
I'm certain that it was no accident that the challenge was brought in the Ninth Circuit. I don't know about getting it to this specific district judge, but certainly having the case in the Ninth Circuit was beneficial to the beneficial to the plaintiffs in the way in the Ninth Circuit precedent and the way the court analyzed the case in their opinion. So it looks like the old case will now become moot. In other words, it's going to go away because that old order will be rescinded. That case will be dismissed, I assume, if they follow proper procedure. And new plaintiffs will have to come out of the woodwork that is affected by the new order in order to claim to get into federal court and bring a new suit. And who knows where that will be? It could be right back in Seattle or somewhere else. Maybe here in Texas.
We'll see what happens. Last question, Byron, and I know lawyers hate this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. In your heart of hearts, having read the memoranda and anticipating what is going to be in the actual executive order, do you think this one's going to pass constitutional muster? Do you think Donald Trump is going to be able to do what the Constitution and Congress in 1952 enabled the president to do, and that's to regulate immigration, who gets in, who gets out of the country?
If the memorandum is accurate, of course I haven't seen the executive order, but assuming the memorandum is accurate and what it purports to say, at least I have not been seen, nor has it been cited to me. I can't imagine at this point what constitutional prohibition or other prohibition would keep Donald Trump's new executive order from being found to be valid, both constitutionally and legally. I the arguments. I learn something new every day, but based on his plenary authority over immigration, if you exempt green card holders and people with visas, I can't imagine how he cannot exercise his authority to prevent others other than those two classes from coming to the United States. So I believe it will be found to be constitutionally viable.
All right, Byron Henry, constitutional law specialist. That was very helpful. Thanks for clearing a lot of that up. We'll see where it goes.
Yeah, glad to be with you. My pleasure.
Okay, thanks again. That was interesting. And I'll tell you something. I'm really gratified to hear Byron Henry kind of lay it out like that, because anyone that's heard me rant and rave on this issue, I felt as an attorney, as a citizen, it was appalling that this executive order actually went into federal court and then through the Circuit Court of Appeals, because the President of the United States has the authority to direct who gets into this country. It's pretty clear, but according to Byron Henry, it looks like this second go-round with the executive order that should come out later this week will be one that Donald Trump will be able to act on. Hey, you're listening to Mike Allen. I'm in for Bill Cunningham, News Radio 700 WLW.